part of Double P Media, doublepmedia.com.
You've dropped in on part 2 of our coverage of Season 5, Episodes 4 through 6 of The Crown on Netflix. Find part 1 in the previous episode.
I didn't want to hear about Queen Elizabeth. I didn't want to hear about Princess Margaret. No, I wanted to hear somebody talk about Hoagie Carmichael for 20 minutes. Give me a break.
Well, nobody's going to be talking about Hoagie Carmichael for 20 minutes.
At all. Nobody should talk about it at all.
Oh, you watch me.
All right. We're
covering the most recent season of The Crown. Make sure that you've watched it before you listen. You've been warned. Are we ready to spin the wheel?
Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay. Bubba, that lettering's small. What does it say?
It says Charles and Anne versus Charles versus Philip. And so this is a topic, but I have to be honest, I'm not sure where this topic is trying to point us, Matt. Why don't you take us through where this topic is going?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I'm talking about is the fact that Anne comes away from this episode actually respecting Charles more, from what I gather, whereas Philip has never been more done with Charles. At least that's the way that I got out of those scenes. So anything pertaining to those scenes that point one way or the other, for me, it's the fact that, Anne appreciates the fact that Charles is actually in love. Probably the only person in the family outside of maybe mom and dad that do genuinely love each other. Everybody else is just having all kinds of troubles. She knows she's had her own kind of troubles. I mean, she's got this thing with Tim going, but and maybe she's looking for some kind of I don't know, confirmation for herself even. But I love when she comes back. They've sent Anne to report on Charles before, and she's come back to the family and done her little reports before. And this time around, she's like, whether you like it or not, this is Charles. This is who he's going to be. And he's not weak. I don't know if that's necessarily an endorsement of him, but it's a recognition of him that I don't think we've seen anybody else in this family have. Philip, on the other hand, makes sure that Charles, who interestingly, in just the very first part of the episode, is making a speech about preserving English. Yet when Philip asks him to say the national the slogan for his division, he goes to the Welsh, because we loved Charles learning Welsh. That was a fantastic episode. But then totally, berates him for that, and basically just says, why are you still here? You've done nothing but destroy this. I'm trying to get us a way ahead, not forward, which Elizabeth, by the way, says at the dinner. She says way forward. I love that look of Philip. Just he stops and he looks at her, and then he just goes back to sipping his soup, because now the Queen said it. So what are you going to do? But I'm getting off the point. Philip is just totally done with Charles. So it's amazing how Charles can create such divisions on the family, depending on and Anne's not even really happy with him, but she can at least respect him, I think. Am I getting this wrong, Susan?
No, but I was wondering, are you alluding to a Stannis Baratheon moment there?
Fewer.
Yeah.
I just thought it was funny that because I think Philip was using a nautical term, right? The way ahead. Or maybe people in English actually use the way forward. But what I loved was how when the Queen said it, it didn't matter that much anymore. When she said forward, it's okay.
Yeah.
When anybody else says it, it's ahead. That's what I loved about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed when they had that meeting where they were discussing, some of the reforms that they could possibly do. And the way that Charles was standing up for much more progressive ideas. It seemed to it make sense. The fact that he was standing up for, it wouldn't necessarily have to be male primogeniture anymore, that the oldest child, whether they were male or female, could be the next in line to inherit. I mean, they have gone ahead and done that now. So, but it sounded like people thought maybe that was a little bit radical back then, with along with some of the things, because that was one of his complaints to Camilla when they were having another conversation, was on the suggestions that they were making from this group were so tepid that it really wasn't much of anything.
Well, what I was going to say, and this isn't on the topic, but I want to be consistent to everybody who's been following along with our podcast, is on the previous podcast when Diana was writing the book and reaching out to the reporter, I should say, to help write the book. The whole time I was thinking, no, don't do it. Oh, don't do it. Oh, that's not good. That's not good. For complete honesty, I had the same thought when Charles said, oh, let's do this interview. And I was like, oh, what are you doing? Don't do that. Don't do that. Are you crazy? Don't do that. Before and during the interview, I kept thinking to myself, actions are louder than words. Really just keep doing your actions through the Prince's Trust, and that will be more powerful and quote unquote get you out of this PR nightmare than an interview would. And if I remember correctly, and apologies if I don't, I'm not sure this interview response, at least in the United States, went 50-50 in positive or negative. I don't know if you guys have any memory of that or not, but
I honestly
it was my
don't.
own thought.
But the fact that it
I
was on
don't either.
ITV instead of BBC tells me something.
Yeah, I don't remember it at all.
The War of the Waleses. How did I was able to read that when I couldn't read two-word ones before? I don't understand. Anyway, my glasses must have kicked in. Actually, all I want to talk about here is specifically Diana's reaction, both to the separation and then, what everybody calls the revenge dress. Now, as I understand it, Susan, these both actually happened the same night that it was aired was when she was attending this event. Do I have that wrong? Because how could it be a revenge dress if she hasn't seen it yet? Or was it just a revenge dress because of what she read in the papers?
I guess I got the impression that it was due to what she had read in the papers.
Okay. Well, that makes more sense because I know that her attending this event actually happened on the same night that documentary aired, or the interview aired on ITV. So that's why I always wondered how could this be a revenge for that, but it's not. It's just a revenge for the article. Okay, that makes more sense to me. How did you feel about Diana? And I felt really bad for Diana. Again, Elizabeth Debicki's doing a really good job of playing someone who's just kind of lost in this monarchy world right now.
Yeah, she is. I think I agree. I think the actress is doing a great job. Yeah, I mean, you can't help but feel terrible for her. It's been a situation that she never should have been put in. I did find them calling it a revenge dress a little odd, because I mean it was a lovely dress, and it made her look as gorgeous as always. But there are other times that she's worn what you would maybe call sexy dresses before, so I'm not sure why this one was so significant, other than the fact that it just coincided with these other things that were going on. So
Yeah, they were just looking for a headline. That's all.
yeah.
Yeah. Bubba, any thoughts about Diana?
What I was going to say, and this is difficult to talk about, but there has always been, what I remember of this time, a very ugly side of maybe human nature judging Camilla's appearance versus Diana's appearance. And so I wonder if, because of how certain people would think of the two of them and their appearance, that it would be almost a thought of, well, look, Diana can wear this type of dress and maybe Camilla couldn't. Once again, it's very difficult to talk about, but I know that will seem to be a big part of the ugliness in the public sphere, I would say, at the time.
Okay. Yeah.
I would agree with that, Bubba, and I think that points back to that earlier episode in the previous season where Camilla was, complaining. Well, not I don't know if it was complaining, but basically telling Charles that they couldn't go forward with some of the things that he was wanting to do because she knew that she was going to be painted as the villain in this fairy tale, that Diana was the injured victim, and there was no way that by comparison she was going to ever be anything but the evil witch who came in and destroyed the fairy tale princess situation.
So I'll stand up for the Camillas out there and say that, ugly people deserve fancy dresses too. There. Wait a minute. No, that's terrible. I
Wait a
realize
minute.
what I just said. Edit,
Ladies and
edit.
gentlemen, send your hate mail. Hate mail goes to @the_double, the letters PHQ on Twitter. By the way, how do you feel about all of this stuff? Does anybody out there in our listening audience have sympathy for Camilla and all of the stuff that her and her family are going through in terms of being hounded by the press and all of this stuff? Is anybody feeling more sympathy for her than they are for Diana? Or or am I crazy? Should I have never have mentioned that? Let us know by tweeting to @LilibetPod on Twitter. You can send emails to mattsaudioblog@gmail.com, MATTS audioblog@gmail.com. Be sure to comment on our YouTube videos. Be sure to hit those like buttons and hit that subscribe button and hit that bell, yo, as our friend John likes to say. Hit that bell, yo. Get those notifications when new videos are coming out while you're at the Double P Media YouTube. That's youtube.com/C/the word double, the letter P, the word media.
Matt, can I add to that? I do feel a sense of sympathy for Camilla. I mean, it's a complicated situation, obviously, all around. But to me, it just goes back to the fact that if they had allowed Charles and Camilla to marry in the first place, I mean, they considered her to be inappropriate for a set of reasons that seems pretty superficial. But if they had allowed that to happen, and if they hadn't pushed Charles and Diana together, then none of all these other horrible issues that everyone dealt with for years would have ever been something that were an issue.
They could have had the tampon conversation in a private room, face to face. They would never have to have that conversation on the phone to get recorded.
Right, with other spouses,
which would make it even
children.
Weirder than it being on the phone because I don't know.
It was a waterfall of problems. One problem leads to the next problem, leads to the next problem.
Yes.
Oh,
And that works very well on a TV show.
It does work good on a TV show. Does anybody else have anything to add about the Way Ahead group, about any efforts here for Charles to preserve the monarchy, all this stuff? We kind of discussed it already, but if you have any additional thoughts, leave them here. Susan, anything?
Just to say that he does have some admirable areas that he's been working for. I mean, that Princess Trust is a wonderful organization that has helped thousands of young people from disadvantaged backgrounds over the years. And I also think that the fact that he has such a huge emphasis on environmental issues is very commendable. So there are aspects of where he wants to put his time and energy that I have some real respect for.
Matt, was it Don't Sweat the Technique? Was that the final song by
Yes, it
Eric B.
was.
and Rakim? Yeah, if something's going to make us feel old, it's Prince Charles dancing or trying to sway to Don't Sweat the Technique by Eric B. and Rakim. Oh my god.
Love that song. Still my favorite. A favorite. I'll tell you what, let's put this up to a parliamentary debate.
Bum, 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 bum.
That will now be melodized and put in.
Bum, 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 bum.
Folks, we do this like high school debate team. Somebody introduces a topic, and then the other two, they have to argue. The first person gets to argue whichever side they want, and the other person has to argue the other side. So, Bubba, why don't you come up with a question, because you're better at these things than I am. Susan gets to argue the first point, or the way that she wants to, and I'll have to argue the opposite. So make sure that it's ridiculous, where I have to argue something ridiculous.
Was the end of the episode too triumphant for Charles?
That is an interesting question. And I'd have to I'd prefer to go back and look at the tape before I fully answer that, but based on just my memory, maybe so. Maybe it was a bit because he certainly had some real pitfalls and problems that he had to deal with, and it did show him as kind of the hero at the end of the story, I guess.
Okay, Susan, that's a great argument. I think you're completely wrong, and here's why.
Of course.
You're playing the result. You're playing the result after seeing, another episode past this. You think you know Charles. You don't know Charles. This is the real Charles. This is the Charles you should know. If anything, this was underplayed. Somebody should have been putting a rose laurel around him. Somebody should have been, like a horse champion or something that he truly is. I mean, who else makes great riveting phone conversation like that? Who else establishes a trust which helps young people? Who else can actually dance to that song? I mean, come on. I didn't see anybody else out there trying, and he did it, by golly. He got down there on the floor with them all. This was undersold. I think that Charles is an absolute champion. That's why I'm double seeing. I'm championing Charles. And I'm saying this is the result of what we should have known in our hearts all along.
Yeah. Well, can I counterpoint here then?
No. Yes.
Well, let's go back to the very beginning of the season then and look at the fact that when Charles was winning the approval of the public over his mother in the that they were calling it the Victoria
Victoria
syndrome.
syndrome. Yeah.
Yeah, that in that case, a lot of people around him were recognizing that a great deal of what was the best asset for him was actually Diana and her popularity and how that reflected on him. And now at this point, he is cutting loose from all that, so he's going to have to suffer the political fallout for getting rid of his best political asset.
Exactly my point. That you've made my point for me, because here he is at the beginning of the season. The only reason that he's popular at all is because of Diana. And now we see him out in the world doing good things for the world. This is undersold just because of that. I mean, Queen Victoria syndrome or not, never mind the fact that he almost was hoping that this poll would go the way that it wanted. And obviously he knows how great he is. And therefore, he is, once again, the king, champion, yet undersold, underappreciated. I mean, he gets the crap jobs. He has to set up his own court as the Prince of Wales, his own kind of Camelot, because he doesn't get a chance to govern because he's got a mother that just won't die. I mean, what kind of this is an undersold happy ending for Charles.
Yeah. I mean, I do give him credit for a few of these things, but when it comes down to it too, he's still very much a complainer, still someone who has, life
With
on a
every
silver
reason to
platter.
complain. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll put it on the poll at Lilibet Pod on Twitter. You vote. Was the Charles ending too triumphant? Yes or no? At Lilibet Pod on Twitter. Be sure to vote. We get hundreds and hundreds of votes, like 800 votes on our polls on the 100 Twitter scale, if you know what I mean. So we will look at some of those polls right now, actually, because we don't need history notes. You'll get them in just a second. But I want to look at these polls from last week, where Bubba clearly beat the crap out of me last week. However, y'all wrong. You all were wrong in predicting what Bubba would like or dislike about episodes 4 through 6, because we asked for a prediction poll from y'all, and quite frankly, I agreed with you. Will Bubba remain critical of the series after 4 through 6, or will he see the light that I've been trying to project to him in the first 3 episodes, but he completely ignored? And actually, 83.3% of you voted that he will remain critical. You were wrong. That doesn't mean you should vote on the next poll, because you're probably going to be right. What's the best way to get the Queen's attention? Either buy her uncle's old estate or buy Herod's. Herod's won 57.1%. That's a win for Bubba. Should Diana have worked with Andrew Morton on a book? Bubba once again wins decidedly. 62.5% said no, she should not have. I think that there's no such thing as bad press. She should have done it. But that's the way that I think. Even though Philip tells Diana to work on the system to make her happy, was it really possible for her to do so given the circumstances? Well, actually, Bubba and I both agreed on this one. It's the only win that I get out of these polls. There is no possible way that she could be happy even within the system. We both said that, and this has never happened before, Bubba or Susan. This has never happened before. 100% of you out of, 900 votes on the 100 Twitter, if you know what I mean, all 100% of you agreed that there is no way that she could have been happy. And who should pay for the yacht repairs, the monarchy or the government? This has also never happened before. Over 1,000 votes on the 100 Twitter, if you know what I mean. Complete and exact tie. 50% monarchy should pay for it.
Wow.
50% government should pay for it. Exact tie. I don't know how that happens. That statistically seems
if you're a
on Twitter.
Tory, once again, as an American, I may be screwing up their government, but would a Tory say the monarchy should pay for it, or would all branches of government say the monarchy should pay for it? The only ones who would say the government should pay for it would be the crown itself. I mean,
aren't the Tories the monarchists?
I think they are. I think
sorry.
they're
I'm messing it all
more
up.
conservative party, right? So they would tend to go with the Constitution and say,
well,
yeah,
isn't
you're part of us.
John Major? What party is John Major in then?
He was a
He
conservative.
was a conservative, yeah.
Oh, okay.
But he also opposed the boat. So that's weird. You're right, Bubba.
Sure.
It's all convoluted. Speaking of convoluted history, here's your history notes for season 5, episode 5, The Way Ahead. Here are your history notes for season 5, episode 5. The Way Ahead group did agree to more radical reforms. According to the Financial Times, the quote-unquote civil list was stashed so it only provided for the Queen, Prince Philip, and the Queen Mother. The Queen agreed to fund other royals' working expenses herself. The royal family also chose to cover the costs of restoring the fire-damaged Windsor Castle themselves, rather than asking taxpayers to step in. Source: historyextra.com. Charles and Diana did separate on December 9th, 1992. Prime Minister John Major had declared, it is announced from Buckingham Palace, that with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. Source: Town and Country magazine. In regards to the double T, the tampon talk, in 1993, the British press published the full transcript of a private conversation between then Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles, in which the two had an intimate and sexual exchange. Source: Time magazine. The feature for Charles with Jonathan Dimbleby occurred on June 29, 1994. The revenge dress was worn on that same night that Charles's documentary aired on ITV in the UK. Source: Entertainment Weekly. The Prince's Trust was founded in 1976 by King Charles III, then Prince of Wales, to help vulnerable young people get their lives on track. Source: Wikipedia. Finally, a biography of Prince Charles by the broadcaster Jonathan Dimbleby was published, which Charles himself contributed to. It was published in 1994. Source: Newsweek magazine. Season 5, Episode 6, Ipatiev House. God, that name scares me every time. I'm sorry if I mispronounce that. Here's another name that's going to scare the crap out of me. Written by Peter Morgan, directed by Christian Schauku, or Schwachow. Schwachow. Schwa. See,
When you're in a hole, quit digging, Matt.
Schwachow. I think that's how you say it. But, send your hate mail at LilibetPod on Twitter or mattsaudioblog@gmail.com, mattsaudioblog@gmail.com. Here's your 64-second recap of the episode. It's all about the past and the present as we travel back in time to where King George V passes a letter via David to Queen Mary regarding the Romanovs, and their safe passage is denied. We witness the result as we see the assassination of the Tsar and his family, as well as later on the desecration of their bodies. In the present, Elizabeth learns of Boris Yeltsin forging a new Russia, as well as his drinking from the Prime Minister. But Philip has events to attend, and Penny is going with him. Elizabeth welcomes Yeltsin to Buckingham Palace, but inquires about his role during the burning of Ipatiev House. He promises progress, but also badmouths the monarchy during a photo session. When the Romanov remains are exhumed, they must be identified as Elizabeth and Philip visit Russia, a first for the monarchy. She attends functions while Philip explores his familial connections and contributes DNA to properly identify remains. He confronts Elizabeth about how they are different and addresses the subject of his companionship with Penny, souring things as he asks Elizabeth to befriend Penny, who has theories about why the Romanovs were denied safe passage. But Elizabeth explains the other side, connecting everything back to the anti-German sentiment in the UK during George's reign. She then confronts Penny about Philip, but resolves to nip it in the bud with a public appearance. Elizabeth questions her relationships, but some advice from the Prime Minister saying just allow her and Philip to be different seems to resolve the tension. We have another wheel. So tiny.
The history with Germany rears its ugly head. Now, Matt, there's a lot of ways we can take it. It is thrilling to go back so far in time. I believe this went to, was it 19? What year did it actually go to? I apologize.
1917 was the year that the
incredible
revolution happened, I believe.
Thrilling. And so the thing about history with Germany is obviously that ties to Philip's family. I don't want to mess this up again. So during World War I, obviously everybody was against Germany in that point. And so, Matt, where do you want to take this topic?
Well, I think I'll start with Susan, actually. And because you have a good perspective on the war itself and some of the political things that were going on, what can you tell us about this, the Romanov family, about what happened to the remains, any of that kind of history stuff that you want to share with us?
Well, one interesting thing is when thinking about Windsor again, World War I is when the family took the name Windsor. So that was, in fact, King George and Mary who adopted that name because their family name was so German and they wanted to distance themselves from that. And so, that was, they, I guess, workshopped some ideas, and someone, one of their equerries or someone like that, came up with the idea of Windsor, and they went with it. So that was, one piece of it. To go to the very end of the episode for a moment in relation to all of this, I do think that Elizabeth was right in what she told Penny. In fact, that the reason that Queen Mary made the decision that she did, as heartless as it definitely seems, is that her main concern was that she was seeing monarchs fall all over the place, and she was concerned about what were they going to make it out of World War I. And so the Romanovs were both unpopular in their own country and in England. So she did make that decision. But what another interesting aspect to it is the fact that the Tsar's mother, Nicholas's mother, and a couple of his sisters were brought to England prior to this decision. So they did offer refuge to a few members of that family, but I guess decided that it was in their mind too risky to offer it to the main royals there. And I wasn't able to research and find my source on this, but I do remember watching a documentary at some point in time about some of these ancestors that later on did find out that that decision had been made, and they were just horrified at the fact that George and Mary had refused to bring them because the government was willing to do so.
Susie knows more than you do.
Yeah. I love the fact that the letter is presented, how it passes through David of all hands to get to Mary. Oh, the other thing that I really loved about it, and I don't know if this hit you guys either, but you think back to season 1, Queen Mary, to Mary, Elizabeth's grandmother, and her mannerisms and the look on her face, everything that actress did. It feels to me like this actress really studied that and watched that and had very similar expressions, shy of the point where she actually breaks down finding the news. But I loved that performance of a young Mary. I thought it was spot on compared to where the actress had taken the older Mary in season 1.
Right. And did they both maybe study Queen Mary herself in that essence? But one other might be a little silly throwaway detail, but one other thing I thought was interesting that they actually paid attention to this was that King George, as he was sitting there with the parrot on his shoulder, the thing that he was paying the most attention to was his stamps. He was talking about the stamps on the mail, the ink on the stamps, and look, this stamp, that was his big hobby, was stamp collecting.
Right.
And that had been brought up in situations where they were comparing him with his more flamboyant, outgoing brother, who Mary was supposed to marry originally, and he died, and then she ended up marrying George instead. So I thought that was fun that they actually emphasized and included that little detail in there.
Yeah, I think that you should realize that there are no such things as throwaway details around here. My life is nothing but throwaway details. Every podcast I do is throwaway details. Throwaway details are welcome. Bubba, did you have any thoughts about George, Mary? Not necessarily the Romanov assassination, unless you want to go there, but just the kind of process that Mary went through to make this decision, and how this just is a repetitive theme throughout the entire series of The Crown. It was really important to this family, and it seems like it shaped a lot of decisions of this family at a critical time.
What I think sometimes when I see scenes like this is, as great as that first season was, could it have used some of flashbacks like this to really set the context of where they were post World War II? And so that was my main thought about it. Of these flashbacks are powerful, and I know one of the topics on the wheel we'll try to cover is that very difficult to watch scene. But this type of context really does put so many actions and decisions and people's thought processes. It explains them so much. And so that was my only thought.
Bubba knows more than you do.
I'd like to add one more detail about Mary, and I think, again, this relates to another YouTube documentary I watched at some point in time that was titled something like How Queen Mary Saved the British Monarchy or something like that. And the emphasis of this video was the fact that a lot of what we have seen, especially like in The Crown, about how Elizabeth behaves as the monarch and, going out to all of these public events, and her role as this impartial but public figure who goes out constantly to factories and different ceremonies and so forth. That was really something that Mary was the first one to really push and emphasize and get the royalty to go out and do that type of thing. So a lot of what we see about how they behave and act now was kind of shaped by her.
And so the next topic on the wheel is, of course, the double P and Elizabeth. The double P in this case stands for Penny and Philip. And so the two topics we want to discuss, the subtopics, I guess I would say, under that kind of big umbrella, is does Queen Elizabeth wear the headscarf that is, kind of so famous as one of her the choices? Is that when she intends to be friendly, is she wearing it when she intends to be friendly, or does she wear it when she's going to be intimate? Because it is not a royal
Intimidate.
intimidate. Oh, sorry, Matt, you're back. Why don't you jump in and take us through this topic that the wheel came up on?
Yeah, I thought that the relationships between both Philip and Penny, and between Philip and Elizabeth, actually three, and between Elizabeth and Penny were really interesting in this episode. More so interesting to me than the whole Romanoff thing, which is something that, just a little dive into history, and you kind of get some of those things. So that wasn't really that exciting to me. But this part of the relationship, or this part of the episode, was, because I think that Elizabeth was initially thinking that she was, and she even carries this out. She's very cold to Penny throughout the entire conversation about her grandmother. Throughout all of that, she's very, very cold to her, and then she feels, just kind of hurt, or she looks upset when it's all over. And I was just wondering, she decided to take the scarf off intentionally, and I was just wondering what you guys thought that meant. Was she saying that, okay, if I have the scarf on, then I'm more friendly, like I am with Porchy, which is the only other example that I can really cite, or am I? Did she decide to take it off, saying, no, I'm going to be the queen. You're going to face the queen, not be with Lilibet. Is that the way you guys interpreted it?
I did not interpret it that way, Matt. And what's interesting is just to follow up on your point, is I actually found the Romanoff stuff more interesting. So you're like, the Romanoff stuff, you didn't engage with that as much. I did. That was the fascinating part of the episode for me. This scene between the Queen and Penny, to me, it was someone who, we were talking about the system so much this season. It was Elizabeth trying to once again get the system to work the way she wanted it to. And so whether she was trying to be intimidating or not, it was like, I'm going to make this work the way I want it to. And that means, Penny, dare I say it, know your place.
In the conversation that Philip and Elizabeth had that initiated some of this, when they were discussing that they were growing apart and he was getting, his intellectual stimulation out of the activities of this group of people that they were, doing the carriage riding and so forth, and that Penny included that. I guess I didn't feel that Elizabeth, the way that she reacted, it came across as this very jealous behavior that I didn't think that the situation necessarily warranted from my perspective, because I didn't think there was anything really inappropriate about what was going on. I mean, it was problematic from the viewpoint that maybe Philip and Elizabeth were growing apart and they needed to deal with the aspects of their relationship, but I didn't think that the time that Philip was spending with Penny and these other people, it didn't seem, that there was something wrong with that. And it felt like
Right.
Elizabeth was trying to infer that it was. I mean, she was like, whoa,
Okay.
why didn't you just get together with the secretary, one of the servants, or something like that? And it's like, that's not the point of what's going on here. This woman wasn't, there was nothing romantic going on, and it seemed totally appropriate from my perspective that they were, they had gotten together initially over the grief that she was dealing with at the loss of her child, and that Phil kind of helped her with that, and then as he got her into the carriage riding, then that became something that they were sharing, and the friendship developed out of that.
Yeah. They really framed the episode, with him saying, "Oh, I've got to go jet set off. Oh, and by the way, I don't guess he mentions it, but it's just kind of like he just gives her a little kiss on the forehead, which is all he's done all season, by the way.
Uh-huh.
But it was almost like she felt a little hurt by the fact that he was, you know, she was going to get to do something. I don't remember what the event was or something. And then the way that he kind of belittles her knowledge about DNA, or, you know, don't you ever ask any questions? Where's your curiosity and everything? And you can see
Oh
how
man.
that with Penny excites him, that she does ask questions, that she does develop theories and everything. But what I gathered from Elizabeth, and like you said, I thought that she treated her a little bit too mean with a little, oh, it's so nice that you read all of those. You know, it felt very, very you know, kind of just a little mean.
Yeah,
And
it's not Penny that she needs to take the headscarf off for. It is Philip.
yeah,
This whole "it's not me, it's you" that he seems to be dropping. I'm saying, monarchs shouldn't have so much power, but at a certain point, it's off with your head, dude. To hell with you. You're saying I don't read? Well, one thing I will be reading your obituary. Oh, snap. Oh, you go, Queen.
It does relate back to earlier seasons where, there was, additional issues with Philip having a very separate life from hers, and they're not seeming to find common ground in a lot of ways. It seemed to me that this was a callback to a lot of that.
yeah. Every time this issue comes up, I always feel like Elizabeth is remembering the ballerina. No matter how many times Philip told her no, it didn't
Ah,
happen. You know, I just feel like that she's always remembering that stuff at the end of season two, despite his assurances. And I honestly believed Philip, as far as a character, that nothing really did happen. Of course, our Holly said no way, it happened, and she's probably right. But every time something like this comes up for Elizabeth since then, I always think, oh, she's thinking about that ballerina again. Is the thing that comes up to me. Now she cried.
Is it
We
odd
never.
that is it odd that nobody's seen that ballerina since?
Dun dun
uh,
dun.
Dun dun dun.
Elizabeth rarely gets emotional about anything. We've learned this about her, right? She's very unemotional. You know, we've only seen her cry maybe a couple of times, because she's just not built that way, evidently. And that scene just really got me when it was over. And I don't know if that was from the relief of it all being over, or if she believed Philip that there was nothing going on, or if she believed that there actually was something going on. I didn't know how to interpret that. Can you guys help me?
Again, think about that message. That message that Philip is dropping is, you know, I'm bored. I gotta go, I gotta keep living. And if you're not part of it, that's fine. And I'm bored, maybe hanging out with you. I mean, that is passive aggressive insulting and hashtag not cool. So whatever she wants to do, I'm down with it.
I do think that the problem resided between those two, but another thing that it made me think about was and back to the first episode when Margaret, or the first of the episodes we're talking about here, when Margaret was being interviewed by the BBC, and she talked about the fact that she was learning piano while her sister was learning constitutional law or whatever it was, reminded me of the fact that we had that earlier in an earlier season episode where Queen Elizabeth, was all of a sudden hit with the fact that she really didn't have a very good, well-rounded education, and she had to bring in a tutor to help her with some things,
Mm.
which again, to me, it seems so odd, and it seems like they were pointing out the idea, before it was even thought that she was going to become the queen. Her mother's attitude about this whole thing was, women of our class, they just need to be taught how to run the household and speak French and, be social hostesses, and they don't need much more than that. And I find that to be so strange when you're talking about someone who is then going to go on to become the monarch, especially in light of when you look back at earlier history when people like Queen Elizabeth and Henry VIII were known for their intellect and the fact that they, were scholarly people and wrote papers and did all these other things, that, the Queen would just not have much of an education. And I know that's a big digression from this, but it really strikes me as odd.
Drink 'em if you got 'em. It's bottoms up, Boris. It's
A double B.
subject matter. Who picked this topic?
I did. I want to talk about Boris
Okay.
Yeltsin. I love him standing on a tank. I love this actor's portrayal of him. I did not love him bad mouthing the Queen right to her but not being able to do it.
Right. You're not supposed to. This is a choice the filmmakers made to make you dislike him in that moment. And it succeeded. Nobody should like him at that moment.
Yeah.
But I loved him otherwise. I mean, let's do some double D, some diplomatic drinking all the time. We can solve the world's problems that way. That's probably a little bit sensitive a subject for some people, so I'll strike that. But I love the whole way that we got to know Boris Yeltsin, mostly through the Prime Minister's stories. Which, by the way, what's Jonny Lee? Is that his name?
Yeah.
Jonny Lee Miller.
Johnny
Yeah.
Lee Miller. Yeah, Jonny Lee Miller. I dropped off a word. At any rate, he was fabulous in this episode as well. I love the way he tells stories about Boris Yeltsin. I've loved him in all of these episodes. I'm really gonna, just savor and think differently about John Major. I didn't think about John Major at all. I've never thought about John Major in my entire life, and yet now I'm finding myself actually liking the guy just because I like this character. So I'd have to do some research to find out whether I'd really like the guy or not. But nonetheless, I love him. I love Boris Yeltsin. Any thoughts on Boris Yeltsin? Can you imagine what a difficult position that is to be in? You're an Anglophile. You were also responsible for the burning down of Ipatiev's house.
Yeah.
That's a tough position to be in, especially when the Queen brings it up to you. There we go, Susan. Should the Queen have brought it up?
Yes. Oh, definitely, she should have brought it up. I think it was something that needed to be dealt with, and she was in the position to get something done about it. So I thought it was totally appropriate for her to do that. And frankly, I think that Boris Yeltsin's idea is that a lot of the Russians are secretly, like you said, monarchists at heart. That's the main system that a lot of them grew up through. So
she should definitely say it. You come into my house, I'm staying it. And you're talking about that betrayal and how you loved Boris Yeltsin. For me, just to be completely honest, we're recording this in the beginning of 2023. And because of certain actions that are happening in the world, I couldn't love the character or have any thoughts about this other than this isn't important to what this relationship, which seems to be what John Major is trying to massage. This relationship goes nowhere. And so I don't normally bring in reality, I guess I should say, to this show. I do try to separate it out, but in this specific case, I couldn't.
Well, I mean, as far as Yeltsin goes, I think that one of the assessments that Major makes in the show is true to true life as well for Boris Yeltsin, and that is that there was a real perception that he didn't really have control of what was going on over there. And you can look to what that has led to with the current regime that is over there right now, where people who do know how to control things end up getting in there and doing what they do, which is absolutely horrific for many people across that continent right now. And we're all horrified by it just because, we just don't understand why. Why do you want to do that to people? Why do you want what? Anyway, I'm going to get off on a tangent if I don't stop. So any final thoughts about Boris Yeltsin before we spin the wheel again?
Just to add on to what you all are saying, that I think that for so many people, when the Soviet Union was breaking down and he was the first, president to come in, there was this period of hope that things were going to change in a positive way, and unfortunately, that hasn't borne out. And it is a sad situation for that country, which has never really known any kind of real freedoms for the majority of its people.
Speaking of other people who never knew their freedom, the Romanovs.
Oh,
This evidently this is historically true. They were woken in the middle of the night, told that they were getting, safe passage. They were asked to pose. They were put together to pose for a photograph, as the way to get them all in the same place to execute them. How awful is all of this stuff? I mean, regardless of who it is or what it is, they're human beings. I had a really hard time watching this stuff. I actually just kind of didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to it. It's not that it wasn't riveting. It's just that it was a little bit too uncomfortable for me. But that, I'm not the kind of person who can sit through an episode of The Last of Us without walking away. I can't sit through an episode of The Walking Dead without, turning the sound down. All those things that will startle me or make me sick or whatever, I just tend to avoid. So, I mean, horrific for that family, horrific for their relatives who essentially, as we learned, Mary was just as struck by it as and she was the one who made the decision. So it's really in the story. And so it's really difficult for me to swallow the way those little girls were treated, especially with the bayonets. That was the thing that got me. What thoughts do you have about the Romanovs, about the exhuming of the bodies? If you want to throw in the DNA, any of that stuff is open game for this last topic. Let's start with you, Bubba.
Well, one thing that happens, just a behind the scenes of the podcast, is we're doing this podcast now months after the season was released. I didn't watch it when it was first released. I was waiting for us to do this podcast.
Silly boy.
And so one thing I like doing is after I watch an episode, I like to go back and see what the general perception was. In so many articles about this specific episode, talk about how graphic it was and how the show is brutal in a way that it really never had been before. However, this is a statement about what it did to the show. I thought it was powerful. I thought it was dramatic. I almost think the show needed something like this. Earlier, I mentioned that these type of flashbacks might have been good to really set the context of season one and the thinking back then was in the minds of some characters. But I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was riveting. And that's why, in some ways, the squabbling between Philip and the Queen and Peggy, to me, it's like the dramatic stakes just aren't the same. And so I was drawn to this part of the episode. I was drawn to this part of the history. And I thought it was fascinating and powerful. And I didn't look away. And it did shake me. It is, once again, horrific. But I think the show, when you're dealing with this type of topic, it needed to be. So I as odd as it is to say, I'm very glad the show did it.
Susan, you've got the last word on this.
I don't know that I have anything else to add. I agree with what Bubba says. I think it was an important and powerful episode, and I'm glad that they went through it and handled it.
Excellent. Well, not to lighten this episode up any, but let's do a parliamentary debate.
Bum, 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 bum.
Here is the debate topic number one. We will have Bubba and Susan argue these. I will ask the question, Scotch or vodka? That is the question, Scotch or vodka. If you're going to be Boris Yeltsin and be drunk all of the time, Scotch or vodka? What are you choosing? What are you standing on the table with and partying with your friends with? Bubba, do you want to go first or do you want Susan to go first?
Well, if you're asking if I'm Boris Yeltsin in this episode, Scotch or vodka, I'm pretty sure the answer is both. I mean, this guy is just he's really just a decade late to appear in Caddyshack. He's so drunk. And so personally, I prefer mixed drinks and vodka. But for Boris Yeltsin in this episode, let me say the wall came down and many bottles came down off the shelf as well.
Okay, so that's a vote for vodka, I guess. That's a double V.
Sure. Okay.
That means
vodka,
Susan Scotch. You're a double S.
Oh, well, I thought maybe that the opposite of both would be a teetotaler. And
Okay.
maybe that would have been the appropriate thing for Boris to go then, because obviously so many of the problems that he is famous for are tied back to the fact that he was drunk all the time. So if he would have just done something about that and not allowed himself to imbibe like that, then who knows? The whole history of Russia might be different right now.
I know I'm not supposed to agree with Susan, but she's right. Boris Yeltsin is giving being drunk a bad name.
Okay, so we'll put it on the poll. Boris Yeltsin, a walking liver disease, yes or no?
Aw.
And we'll also put up the question, Scotch or vodka. Let you guys choose, since Bubba and Susan can't both, or something
I did
completely
choose
different.
vodka for me, but once again, you framed it for this character, so.
Oh, okay. And vodka for you. But anyway, we'll put it on a poll at Lilibet Pod on Twitter. Be sure to vote on the polls. One last question, and this might be a little bit too serious for actually a parliamentary debate. What do you guys think? Was Philip right to ask Elizabeth what he asked her to do about Penny, to befriend her? I know we gave Philip a lot of trouble for being this guy that is, it's not me, it's you. But I mean, if the relationship truly is innocent, doesn't it seem like a practical solution? What do you think, Susan?
Well, I think that if Philip could have handled it in a better manner, he was complaining about Elizabeth and he growing apart. And if he wanted to include a friendship with Penny as something that would benefit all of them, and if he framed it in a way where it wasn't you need to get to be her friend because it's important to me, but rather, I think this would be something you would really enjoy. And, these are really close relatives of theirs. So, I mean, I think it would have been okay, but I think he went about it the wrong way, is what I'm trying to say.
So the deliverables were fine, but the delivery was terrible, is what you
Yes, right.
said. Okay. Bubba, what do you think?
Anytime this show wants you to choose between Philip and Queen Elizabeth, I think we know which side the show wants you to decide on. I'm with the Queen. Off with his head. Off with her head.
I'm completely
Throw
with
him in the
Philip here.
tower. Throw him
He's
in the
just
tower.
being honest and expressing himself, Bubba. He's being honest and he's expressing himself. There's nothing wrong with that. Today, he just stood up for her, so she obviously knows where she stands with him. She knows that he adores her, that he will go to bat for her, that he loves her, and he's asking one little thing: can we please keep the press from thinking something that is not happening?
No.
Is happening, so that I can actually be friends with this person and enjoy my pursuits. I let you play with your dogs. Let me play with my dogs.
Prince Philip, you're like, Prince Philip has proven he stands up for her. Yeah, in previous episodes, but what about this episode?
In this episode, he's standing up for himself for once.
No. Hello. Queen, Prince. Queen, Prince.
We'll put it on the poll. Is the Queen always higher than the Prince? Is the Queen always higher than the Prince? Did Philip do the bad thing? Yes or no? At Lilibet Pod on Twitter.
Listen, Prince Philip. I mean, we talk about princes, but there's like the king and queen. Prince Philip is down here, like below rooks.
No, not even on the board.
Not even on the board. That's exactly right. There's no prince on the board. From what
history
from
notes
the
for
chess I
season
play.
5. Oh, come on. Here's your history notes for season 5, episode 6. Here are your history notes for season 5, episode 6, Ipatiev House. On July 17th, 1918, the Romanovs were woken early in the morning thinking they had gotten safe passage and, under the guise of taking photographs to prove their safety, were executed. Source, insider.com. There was a Soviet hardliner coup attempt in August of 1991. Source, BBC.com News. UK Prime Minister John Major did visit Boris Yeltsin in January of 1992. Source, the John Major Archive. The remains of Nicholas, Alexandra, and 3 of their daughters, Anastasia, Olga, and Titania, were found in 1979, though the bodies were only exhumed in 1991 after the collapse of the Soviet Union, according to the AFP. As Tom Parfit of The Times reports, DNA testing carried out at the time confirmed that the remains were authentic. Source, SmithsonianMag.com. Speaking of which, Prince Philip did contribute a blood sample, and his DNA was compared to that of the remains and other family members. This allowed researchers to confirm virtually beyond a doubt that the bodies were indeed those of the murdered Romanovs. Source, Washington Post. On October 17, 1994, Queen Elizabeth II became the first ruling British monarch to set foot on Russian soil. Source, Newsweek magazine. And finally, the wedding anniversary for Elizabeth and Philip would have been on November 20th, 1994. Source, Doing Math. So, folks, we've come to the end of yet another episode of Podcast Lilibet, where we have discussed Season 5, Episodes 4 through 6. Bubba, do you have any final thoughts?
These 3 episodes really got me on board with Season 5. I can't wait to finish it and catch up to where everybody else was back in November.
Susan, final thoughts?
Well, I enjoyed these episodes. Particularly the ones that did relate back to older times. So, but they were all pretty good. Not my favorite season overall, but I like it.
You want to go back for episodes 7 through 9?
Sure, if you'll have me.
Susan, have you finished Season 5? And if so, tease me. What can I expect over these final 4 episodes?
More
I
drama.
love Double D.
More drama. I can see it coming.
Deadly drama. What's the double D?
Should I say it? Or should I let him figure out
Not
what
if
the
it's a
double D
spoiler.
is?
Not if it's a spoiler. I don't know how far it goes. If it's divorce,
Divorce
if he doesn't-
drama.
Okay.
Okay.
Anyway, we'll see you next time on Podcast Lilibet. Bye.
I want people to listen to these things. Call me crazy. Call me stupid. If I'm going to spend 2 hours of my life recording it, I want somebody to actually
I want to
listen.
fight the establishment.
No, you don't. That's what's so funny is you don't. Boy, you and Catfish. Do you want me to pull up the stats on you and Catfish's? What was that show? That was a
Well, that was a terrible show. That's not fair.